I can see is the Liberals have filled their pockets, and it's appropriate that we do call it Green Slush Fund. But I was walking over in March when the Innovation Shadow Minister said, you know, think about this. I think this is going to rock Canada because it's way bigger than when Chrétien's government on the sponsorship scandal, $42 million was handed off to many of their advertising agencies and Liberal friends. We all remember the golf balls being presented out back at the time, and that total bill was $42 million. Today, we're talking 10 times that amount, $400 million. So when the Minister of St. Marguerite's told me that in March, little did I realize, wow, 10 times the $42 million on the sponsorship scandal that, by the way, took the Liberals down in defeat, and now this is way bigger. It is way bigger. I know when I walked over here to the House with them, I said, you know, Saturday was my 9th anniversary as a member of Parliament, elected in 2015. Yes, thank you. It was bittersweet then because the Harper government had lost in 2015, but we retained the seat in Saskatoon Grasswood. So what have we accomplished in 9 years?
I believe there's a point of order from the Honourable Member for Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I hear the member for Timmins and James Bay heckling, and I'm wondering if he just wants to apologize for the tweet from this weekend.
That's descending into debate. That's descending into debate. Point of order, the Honourable Member for Timmins James Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm concerned that there's so much rage. They've called us.
I think we're descending into debate once again. We're in a debate, and I'll just wait for this to calm down before acknowledging the Honourable Member for Saskatoon Grasswood. We're good. Are we done the second? Are we done the secondary conversation? Monsieur l'honorable député de Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. I didn't realize that the childcare on the Hill was here.
The Honourable Member for Timmins James Bay on another point of order.
No, I'm just following up on my colleague and the fact that after you asked us to settle down and respect, that member continued to throw personal attacks at me. I think it's really unacceptable. I asked you to make sure that he behaves. This is a House of Commons, not a friend.
Okay. And I will make sure that we stick to the conversation we're having, which of course is on the privilege motion. And it seems like there's a lot of side conversations going on at the same time. I will suggest the honourable members to stick to what the agenda actually has for us today and take the conversation outside. If you take the conversation outside, if you need to. The honourable member for Saskatoon Grasswoods. I like to say from the top, but at least, you know, back up a couple of sentences.
No, I could do that. Thank you very much. Like I was saying, Mr. Speaker, Saturday marked the 9th year that I was a member of Parliament. Bittersweet, as I talked about, because the Conservatives lost government that year. But it was interesting because when I look at the Sustainable Development Technology Canada, it was a pretty good organization. It was started in 2001. It's done a lot of good work in energy, agriculture, transportation, cutting greenhouse emissions. Jim Balcelli was once the chair of SDTC. It's been run pretty well until the Liberals took over and filled the board with their cronies. And 2017, all of a sudden, the Sustainable Development Technology Canada changed. But you know, when I mark my 9th anniversary, I just look at the scandals of this government. You know, almost immediately that Christmas was Aga Khan, where the Prime Minister took that vacation, paid vacation. And then later, SNC Lavalin, one of the biggest controversies that we've had in the last 9 years in the House. The Winnipeg Labs, the wheat charity that cost the Finance Minister his job. The Arrive scam, $60 million for an app that really would have cost maybe $80,000 to produce. And then now we have another one, the Green Slush Fund. So in 9 years, we can't count how many scandals this Liberal government has been involved in. And here we have another one. We're on day 12 of this debate. The Liberals, of course, are refusing to obey an order of this House which would permit the distribution of the documents regarding $400 million scandal. A $400 million scandal. Canadians have seen countless scandals, and I mentioned a number of them already in the last 9 years. This one, though, reaches new heights that we have not seen ever in the House of Commons. The Liberals have gone to tremendous lengths to make sure that the public, the RCMP, and even this House does not obtain access to these documents. That would expose the injustice done with SDTC. The Green Slush Fund, which was called the Sustainable Development Technology Canada, has turned into this slush fund of Liberal insiders. This program was made to give away taxpayer dollars to green technology initiatives, some even in my province of Saskatchewan. It is important to note that this government was directly in charge of appointing the board members to this fund. This means that the Prime Minister himself would have personally appointed some of those board members. What happened to those Liberal insiders that directed funds meant for green technology towards, unfortunately, their own company, totaling $400 million and 186 conflict of interest? Those are 186 incidents where taxpayer money, like me and you, could have gone to help families in this country, many families. A good portion of the families, in fact, are dealing with the cost of living. We could have helped businesses, small businesses in this country, stay afloat. Instead, the money was funneled to companies with ties to senior Liberal officials. Furthermore, the Auditor General found that on top of those staggering numbers, $58 million was given to the company that were ineligible at all for the fund. 10 ineligible projects, I've got them right here, totaling $58 million. Well, actually, $58,784,613. That means that not only taxpayer money was given to people who should not have received a single nickel, 58 million plus was given to those who should have never been considered at all for the fund. That's ridiculous. And this Prime Minister's Canada is where so many are forced now to line up at food banks, including my city, where over 20,000 a month in a city and a province that feeds the world. Disgusting what's happened in this country in the last 9 years. Just think about that. My province, in fact, I met with SARM, Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities, this morning. They feed the world. And yet, when they look at all our communities in Saskatchewan, 9 years out from 2015 to 24, there's lineups in every community for food. The cost of living. So, we wonder, the contracts that were given out to Liberal insiders, it would be important, I think, Mr. Speaker, to note some of those 186 conflicts of interest, just to give Canadians an idea of the Liberal corruption that we're seeing today. There was a board member appointed to the Green Slush Fund way back 2016, interesting, right? A year after the election, who runs a venture capital firm called Cycle Capital. Her company received a total of $250 million from the Green Slush Fund. Some of that came before she was even a member, but $118 million came to the companies that she had invested in while she was on the board. The value of her company amazingly tripled. Surprise! When she was there. Well, I guess. In fact, the Minister of the Environment was a strategic advisor for Cycle Capital from 2009 right up to 2018 before joining the cabinet. In fact, he also owned shares in that company, which is interesting since, Mr. Speaker, the company got so much money from the Green Slush Fund. As for the Green Slush Fund Director, Stephen Kukucha, he previously worked as a Liberal Environment Minister, worked for a Liberal Environment Minister, and also worked as an organizer for the Liberal Party on behalf of the Prime Minister in the province of BC. That is how we get the job on the board of the Green Slush Fund. Unsurprisingly, companies in which had financial interests received $5 million from the fund. Even worse, when questioned in a committee hearing, he downplayed the issue, stating, "Wow, that's just a small amount of money. It's no big deal at all." No big deal, eh? $5 million. But it's no big deal. No big deal to the Liberal insiders. That's the attitude of this government, and that's the attitude of the board of SDTC. You know, a lot of us have been on boards. We've taken training, governance training. I was part of Johnson Shoyama, a group out of Regina. I can't believe they haven't been scolded long before this. Board members that obviously, when they were put in as a board, went through governance training. They shouldn't be in the room at all when they vote on certain issues dealing with companies that they're associated with. We are surprised. In fact, why are we surprised? The finance minister stood in this House and said, our budget won't exceed $40 billion this year. Well, we're into mid-October. We're at $47 billion. Nothing surprises us. Already 17% over budget, and we're in the middle of October. Liberals know how to spend. They know how to spend to keep their friends happy. This is ridiculous. You know, we look at this, and it's too bad, because I think the Sustainable Development Technology Canada, 20 years was put in a place where we needed this. It was for innovation. I look in my province of Saskatchewan for agriculture. We are the most innovative province when it comes to agriculture in the world. And this fund, SDTC, certainly helped them. They are amongst the best in the world and continue to be so. And they don't need government money to be innovative, Mr. Speaker. Our companies are doing it on their own. The expense of taxpayers, though, that this insider favoritism has become all too common with this Liberal government. And I think one thing is for sure, it really pays to be a Liberal insider. We've seen it with all the violations, the Weed Charity, the Arrive Scan, SNC Lavalin, along with SDTC. But this is $400 million. This isn't a chunk of change. This is $400 million of taxpayers' money. What could we do with that? We could do a lot in this country. It's only fair to assume that they do not want to comply with the will of the House to cover up this scandal, Mr. Speaker. You have ruled, the Speaker has ruled, that this failure to adhere to the will of Parliament constitutes a breach of privilege, which is why all business in the House has been stalled now. This is the 12th day. 12th day. Canadians, coast to coast to coast, have a right to know what the inside the documents are and what are they trying to hide. It is not only because Conservatives want to give Canadians answers, they want to see the documents released, but it's also because the RCMP has concluded there is reasonable ground to believe that an offence under the Criminal Code may have been committed. The people of Saskatoon grasswood, Mr. Speaker, who send their hard-earned tax dollars here, want to know where that money went. They want to know where the $400 million. We have these here. 10 ineligible projects totaling $58 million. 90 cases where conflict of interest policies were not followed. That was $75 million. All total here, we got $390 million. It was interesting because I was looking over the testimony by one of the whistleblowers, and I quote, "I know the federal government, like the minister, has continued saying that there was no criminal intent and nothing to be found. But I think the committee would agree that they're not to be trusted on this situation. I would be happily agree to whatever the findings are by the RCMP, but I would say I wouldn't trust that there isn't any criminality unless the RCMP is given full authority to investigate." Full authority would be to give the papers over. That was part of the whistleblower, who we commend, stepping up in helping this country defend $400 million of taxpayers' money given to Liberal insiders. It is unreal that this has taken place in Canada. You know, I read an interesting article, and I know a lot of my friends on the other side probably won't agree with this, but I'm going to quote it from last week. Canada's national newspaper, the Toronto Globe and Mail. It states, and I quote, "The most outrageous show of contempt has been the government's months-long refusal to hand Parliament a complete set of documents that they were ordered to produce in a motion that was passed in this House in June." This is the Globe and Mail. "The Liberals say the production goes too far," and I quote, "more importantly, were the reference to the RCMP not in the order." Now, according to the Globe and Mail editorial, the Liberals would find other excuses, and they have, Mr. Speaker, not to hand over the documents about the Sustainable Development Technology Canada, or to release some of them with heavy redactions, as it has done so far. That's because the Federal Ethics Commissioner and the Auditor General both found dozens of cases where SDTC handed out grants totaling tens of millions of dollars without following conflict of interest guidelines. This is the Globe and Mail. This is an editorial of the Globe and Mail, Canada's national newspaper. This isn't the Conservative Party of Canada. This is a well-respected media outlet in this country. The government has no choice, according to the Globe and Mail, to turn the documents over. The House has the absolute power to order the production of government documents, and only it can decide if the order has been respected. As the Speaker ruled in September of 26th of this calendar month, the Globe and Mail editorial states, and I quote again, "The power to order the production of documents is essential to Parliament's role as a check on the government. Without it, it cannot do the work it was created to do. The Liberal government's efforts to subvert that power is a direct attack on Parliament and a show of contempt for this institution." So that was the Globe and Mail last Thursday, the editorial board for the newspaper. You know, Mr. Speaker, Canadians know that this is far from the first scandal of this government. I named 9 or 10 already in the 10 years that I've been here. SNC, Winnipeg Labs, We Charity. We had a number of ventilators by a former Liberal MP that came through here, Frank Baylis. I know my colleagues on the other side of the House like to think that this is just incompetence on the government's part and that it has nothing to do with them. Well, guess what? Let me remind them that the government is supposed to be accountable for every one of the ministers is supposed to be accountable for their departments and make them aware that taxpayers in this country are watching. The people involved, making sure the taxpayer money is spent correctly without corruption. The Minister of Innovation, in this case, who the Auditor General said was at fault, is clearly, in this case, not being accountable for his actions. If these actions are criminal, like the RCMP has indicated it could, would this not be a cover-up of criminality? The whole scandal could end if the Liberals simply say, hand over the unredacted documents today. If the RCMP finds nothing of value in the documents, well, then so be it. We move on. Then we move on to Randy versus Randy. And that's another one that we're going to be talking in the House very shortly. So over a span of 5 years, the board approved 405 transitions. And out of these, this is where the auditor found the 186 conflict of interest, which equals about 82%. That means 82% of the examined transactions individuals gained from their own decisions to sign over the money. This lack of oversight is highlighted by the Auditor General. It's allowed for more conflicts of interest to persist without even being addressed, Mr. Speaker, ultimately contributing to a very serious ethical lapse within the government's handling of these transactions. Canadians have a right to know where $390 million have gone. They pay their hard-earned taxes, each and every one of us, and I think it's deplorable, just deplorable, how this government has wasted away $390 million. Not one of them is standing up in this House in the last 12 days talking about government waste. And this is a form of a violation. We need to have those documents to the RCMP unredacted. They need to see them, and we can move on to another corruption that I think this House will deal with, Randy versus Randy. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Nepean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member referred to Parliamentary Budget Officer's note on the deficit. I would like to ask the member his comments on the inflation rate, which has fallen to 1.6%, the interest rates, fourth time, tomorrow it's going to get cut by Bank of Canada. In fact, the interest rates are projected to be 3% by July 2025. Yesterday, there was a report on Canadian Consumer Index rising to 30 months high. 30 months high Canadian Consumer Index. And the Toronto Stock Exchange, as of today, year till date, has risen by 18%. So I would like to ask the member, why does he not also comment on these things that the government actions has resulted? Falling inflation rate, falling interest rates, rising consumer confidence index, rising Toronto Stock Exchange index. I would like to know the member's comment on that.
The Honourable Member for Saskatoon Grasswood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is no confidence anymore in this country. You're from Nepean. I look at the Toronto stock, the member is from Nepean. I look at the Toronto condo industry right now that has collapsed. Why? They have absolutely no faith in this government. They have destroyed the housing industry in 9 short years in this country. We have tents in every city. It's deplorable when I walk down Bank Street here in Ottawa. We see our big friend Mike outside in his tent. We all talk to him. He used to be from Saskatchewan. You ever stop and talk to him why he's been on that tent for the last 3 years? I have. He's got a tent. He's got his dog inside. He can't afford anything. Canadians can't afford anything. 2 million plus Canadians are lining up at a food bank. And this member thinks we're okay right now? I can't see it, Mr. Speaker. I really can't. Canadians are hurting more than they have ever hurt under this government.
Et commentaire, l'honorable député de La Salle.
The Honourable Member for La Salle et Marverdun. Mr. Speaker, Schopenhauer, a philosopher, said that life is a pendulum that swings between suffering and annoyance and boredom. Here, on this side of the House, we're a bit bored and annoyed, but I think on the other side of the House, there is some suffering caused by self-sabotage. The Liberals are sabotaging their own parliamentary agenda. Can my colleague explain to the House why, in his view, the government is self-sabotaging by refusing to produce the documents called for by the House? The Honourable Member for Saskatoon West.
Thank my bloc friend. A very good question. I think if I had a fly tomorrow on the wall of the Liberal caucus, we might know. I mean, the Prime Minister hasn't been here for weeks. The Prime Minister is facing a revolt within his own caucus. They're 20 points down in the polls. It's interesting. Do they want to be here? Probably not. But they can set 2 or 3 of them in here, Mr. Speaker, and talk about what we're talking about. Give the documents over. We can move on. We haven't done a government bill in this House for over 2 weeks, and it appears that they're in no hurry for this, which is a crime for all Canadians watching here. It's not our fault as opposition members. It is the government's fault that they haven't got the unredacted documents in front of the RCMP so we can move on.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. The Honourable Member for Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Speaker, it's always a pleasure to rise on behalf of the people from Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou. I always love listening to my colleague. Not only does he make many great points, but he says them so eloquently. He's just got this beautiful voice that's so easy to listen to in these parts. Mr. Speaker, if I could ask him one question, it's this. Canadians need to know the truth, $400 million worth of the truth. What could the Liberals possibly be hiding that they would be prepared to grind Parliament to a standstill? It must be something salacious. Does he agree?
Honourable member for Saskatoon-Grasswood.
I want to thank my honourable member from Kamloops. He's done a great job on this. As I said, the sponsorship scandal back in the day was $42 million, and all the Canadians went, oh, what are they saying about this? 10 times the amount, $400 million, and we don't know all the specifics because they won't hand over the documents to the RCMP. That's all we're asking. Let's move on. Unredacted documents to the RCMP. Canadians deserve to know where $372,774 is going.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we're not playing the game that the Conservatives want to play. The Conservatives want to put the Conservative Party first and foremost. We want to put the concerns of Canadians first and foremost. And to try to give the false impression that it is the government in any fashion whatsoever that is preventing legislation from debating, it is the Conservatives that refuse to allow a vote on the motion that they've actually have put on the floor. It is the Conservative Party of Canada, the far right, that goes out to discredit the RCMP. Don't listen to what the RCMP say. Don't listen to what the Auditor General of Canada is saying. Don't listen to what the former Deputy Law Clerk is saying. We have our game to play, and who gives a damn about Canadians? That's the attitude that we hear from the Conservatives day in and day out. The question I have for the members, when is the Conservative Party of Canada going to start caring about Canadians as opposed to their own personal self-interests?
The honourable member for Saskatoon-Grasswood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would say one thing to the honourable member from Winnipeg. Call the carbon tax election. Bring it on. Okay? Bring it on. If this is what this government wants to do, don't show any of the documents. Don't tell Canadians where the $390 million is, because we have an idea. And the RCMP would have an idea. The Auditor General has an idea where it went to their friends. And they're embarrassed about it, Mr. Speaker, and obviously they don't want to show the documents because it would be troubling not only for those involved in their companies, but for the Liberal Party of Canada and this government.
Questions and comments? The Honourable for Charleswood, St. James's, no? All right, I guess the Honourable member Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou wants to give another try.
Oh, it's always great to get back in the ring for another swing here, Mr. Speaker. It's always a pleasure to rise on behalf of the people from Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou. And I hear the member from Winnipeg, and it's not what he says, but the volume with which he says it that always impresses me. Mr. Speaker, I hear my colleague from Saskatoon Grassland, and he is speaking just eminently reasonable language here, and yet we have the member from Winnipeg, who, interestingly enough, speaks on behalf of the whole Liberal caucus. In fact, in this whole debate, I'd be very interested to go see. You would probably hear him speak more than every other Liberal combined. Does that mean he's the only one who really believes these things? Because it's just ridiculous and unbelievable. I wonder if my colleague could have a word about that. Thank you.
Honourable member for Saskatoon-Grasswood.
Well, I think what's at stake here, Mr. Speaker, is the 186 violations. The 186 ethical violations of this company that started out very good in 2001. I talked about a lot of good things that the Sustainable Development Technology Canada did. But since this government took over, since they filled the board with their Liberal cronies, now we're seeing some issues. And 186 ethical violations totaling $390 million. Canadians deserve an answer.
And comments? The honourable member for Nepean.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member mentioned answering a previous question that the Liberals are lagging 20% below in the opinion polls. With inflation rates falling to 1.6%, interest rates falling, consumer confidence index increasing, the so-called lead of 20% has already shrunk to 13% today, and it will disappear to 0% soon. So I would like to ask the members' comment on that.
The honourable member for Saskatoon Grasswood in about 50 seconds.
You know, all I got to say is Canadians are hurting. I go everywhere in my riding. I go to rinks. I go to the Legion. I door knock. In fact, we're having a provincial election right now. And it's funny because Scott Moe, who's the Premier, isn't running against the NDP. He's running against the national NDP and the Liberals. And he's going to win next Monday on that because people in my province are fed up with the federal Liberals and the NDP. And you know what? On Monday, you're going to see what's going to happen in my province. They'll be returned again. As Mr. Bill Wazer did a wonderful editorial today in the Saskatoon Star Phoenix. This will be an historic election win for the Sask Party on Monday night.